The sterile hum of fluorescent lights filled the briefing room aboard the SS Aurora, a massive orbital station suspended above Earth. Commander Elena Voss adjusted the collar of her flight suit and scanned the faces of her team. Their expressions ranged from excitement to unease. The weight of the mission had settled over them all, even if no one would admit it yet. Dr. Kieran Malloy sat at the far end of the table, his thin frame hunched over a tablet as he scrolled through endless data streams. His glasses reflected a kaleidoscope of graphs and diagrams, making his gaze unreadable. Next to him, Lieutenant Hiro Tanaka leaned back, arms crossed, his demeanor calm, but eyes sharp. He had the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough space missions to know that confidence alone wouldn't save anyone. Maeve Carter, the team's engineer, slouched in her chair, her short, dyed blue hair tucked beneath a standard-issue cap. She twirled a pen between her fingers, glancing at the clock impatiently. Elena cleared her throat, commanding their attention. "Let's get to it. You've all seen the preliminary reports, but I'll summarize. TrES 2b, discovered over a decade ago, is an exoplanet in the Kepler-1 system. What makes it unique, and why we're here, is that it reflects less than 1% of the light it receives. It's the darkest planet ever recorded, darker than coal or black paint. For years, astronomers assumed this was due to its atmosphere, composed of light-absorbing gases. Recently, however, our probes picked up something else. She tapped a button on the console, and the room dimmed as a holographic projection appeared above the table. A black sphere floated in a sea of stars, faintly outlined by a distant sun's glow. Then the sphere shimmered, emitting rhythmic pulses of light and dark, like a heartbeat. "This," Elena continued, her voice even but tinged with curiosity, "is an anomaly. It's not random, nor is it a natural phenomenon we've encountered before. The patterns resemble communication. Basic, yes, but deliberate. The pulse intervals are consistent, almost mathematical. HQ believes it warrants further investigation. So here we are." Dr. Malloy leaned forward, his voice eager but strained. "Commander, are we certain these pulses are artificial? Couldn't they just be some atmospheric quirk? Maybe volcanic activity throwing up particles that distort light?" "That's what the probes were supposed to confirm," Elena replied, meeting his gaze. "But the closer they got, the less data they sent back. Instruments stopped working. Every probe sent near the planet was either destroyed or disappeared. What little telemetry we recovered suggested extreme gravitational fluctuations, far beyond what we expected for a gas giant of its size." A silence settled over the room, heavy and suffocating. Even Carter stopped spinning her pen. The mission was starting to feel far less like a cutting-edge scientific expedition and more like walking into the unknown with a flashlight that might flicker out at any moment. "Why send us if the probes couldn't handle it?" Tanaka asked, his voice calm but pointed. Elena sighed. "Because we're better than probes, because the cost of not knowing outweighs the risks. TrES 2b is too anomalous to ignore. If there's even a hint of something alive out there, we need to confirm it." The word alive lingered in the air. Space exploration had its share of mysteries, but true alien life had always been the Holy Grail. Most missions found barren rocks, frozen oceans, or the faint chemical traces of long-extinct microbes. The idea of something alive, here and now, was tantalizing, but it also carried weight, the kind of weight that made seasoned astronauts hesitate. Carter broke the silence with a nervous chuckle. Alive, huh? Great. Let's just hope it's friendly. Malloy smirked, but there was no humor in it. Friendly doesn't matter. If it's alive, it'll be beyond our understanding. That's the point. Focus, Elena snapped. This is a reconnaissance mission, nothing more. We land, we investigate, we collect samples if possible, and we leave. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. Understood? The team murmured their agreement, though unease lingered in their eyes. The briefing ended shortly after, and the crew dispersed to prepare for departure. Elena lingered in the empty room, staring at the holographic image of TrES 2B. There was something unsettling about its darkness, even as a projection. It felt more like an absence than a presence, as if the planet didn't merely absorb light, but devoured it. Hours later, the Artemis IV launched from the station, its engines roaring to life with a controlled fury. The journey to TrES 2B would take weeks, though most of that time would be spent in cryosleep. The ship was sleek and sturdy, a workhorse designed for deep space travel. Inside, the crew settled into their pods, the familiar hiss of freezing agents lulling them into artificial slumber. Elena was the last to enter her pod, her mind still racing. She thought about the rhythmic pulses, about the disappearing probes, about the whispers in her own gut that told her they were heading into something far bigger than themselves. As the cryosleep gel encased her, she wondered, briefly and futilely, if they would all wake up again. The Artemis IV slipped into the void, and ahead the blackened shadow of TrES 2B awaited. The blackness of TrES 2B swallowed the Artemis IV as it approached orbit. It was unlike anything the crew had ever seen, a void so absolute that even the distant starlight seemed reluctant to touch it. The planet loomed like a perfect absence, an unbroken silhouette against the endless sprawl of space. The ship's sensors flickered erratically. Screens blinked with warnings about low visibility, gravitational distortions, and fluctuating energy fields. Hiro Tanaka gripped the flight controls with steady hands, his face bathed in the dim glow of the dashboard. "We're entering orbit," Tanaka said, his voice calm but strained. "Gravity's spiking beyond projections. Brace for turbulence." The crew strapped into their seats, the hum of the engines rising in pitch as the ship fought against the planet's pull. The Artemis IV rattled violently, metal groaning under stress. A sharp jolt threw Maeve Carter forward against her harness. "Christ," she muttered, holding on to her console. "This thing's not playing nice." Elena Voss, seated next to Tanaka, glanced at the readouts. The planet's gravity was erratic, pulling in uneven bursts like a hand tightening and releasing its grip. The pulses felt deliberate, almost alive. "Stabilize us, Tanaka," she ordered, her voice firm. "We're not losing control now." "Trying," Tanaka replied, his jaw tight. With practiced precision, he adjusted the ship's thrusters, compensating for the sudden shifts. The ship steadied, though the underlying tension in the air remained. As they descended into the atmosphere, the external cameras revealed a surface unlike any they had imagined. Instead of the swirling clouds of gas typical of other hot Jupiters, TrES 2B's sky was a churning mass of black vapor, tinged faintly with veins of dim red light that pulsed like blood through an artery. The atmosphere seemed to consume the ship's lights, rendering even their high-intensity beams weak and ineffective. "This isn't just darkness," Malloy said, staring at his monitor. His voice carried an edge of awe. "It's like the planet's actively absorbing light. Photons just disappear." Maybe it's an atmospheric phenomenon, Carter suggested, though her tone was unconvincing. She stared at the viewport, her reflection barely visible in the faint ambient glow. It's not just the atmosphere, Malloy muttered. The ground's the same. Look, the ship broke through the dense clouds, and for the first time, they saw the planet's surface. A vast expanse of black stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by faint patterns of bioluminescent light. The lights moved in slow, rhythmic waves, forming intricate, shifting patterns like a living constellation. Those formations, Malloy whispered, his face pale. They're organized, too complex to be geological. Elena felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Could be a natural phenomenon, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Let's not jump to conclusions. Something's not right, Tanaka said, frowning at his controls. Instruments are acting up. Gravity's pulling us down faster than expected. Compensate, Elena ordered. We're not crashing this far in. The ship shuddered again, the turbulence intensifying as they neared the ground. Warning lights flared across the cockpit. Tanaka wrestled with the controls, sweat beading on his brow. Carter cursed under her breath as a display fizzled out, replaced by static. "Landing gear deployed," Tanaka said through gritted teeth. "But it's gonna be rough." The Artemis IV slammed into the surface with a jarring impact, throwing the crew against their harnesses. The lights flickered before stabilizing. The ship groaned, its hull adjusting to the planet's crushing gravity. "Status report," Elena barked, unbuckling her harness. "Gears intact," Carter said, checking her console. "Hull's holding, but we're close to the limit." "Atmosphere's breathable," Malloy added, his voice tight with excitement. "But we'll need suits to protect against whatever's affecting the light." Elena nodded. "Prep for EVA. We move as a team." The crew suited up, their helmets sealing with a soft hiss. As they stepped into the airlock, Elena gave one final glance at the monitors. The bioluminescent patterns outside seemed almost eager, pulsing faster as if aware of their presence. The airlock opened with a mechanical groan, and the team stepped onto the surface of TrES 2B. The ground was unnervingly silent, each step absorbed into the thick, oppressive darkness. Their suit lights barely penetrated more than a few feet ahead, and even those beams felt weak and unnatural. The surface was smooth and glass-like, yet it seemed to shift subtly underfoot, as if alive. Malloy knelt and placed a gloved hand on the ground. "It's warm," he said, his voice tinged with wonder. "Almost organic." The faint bioluminescent lights rippled closer, surrounding the crew in shifting patterns. Elena felt a prickle of unease, her pulse quickening. "Stay alert. We don't know what's out here." As they moved further from the ship, the lights grew brighter, revealing strange formations in the distance. Towering spires jutted from the ground, their surfaces covered in translucent membranous layers that pulsed faintly, like veins. The structures seemed alive, breathing in sync with the planet's rhythm. "What the hell are those?" Carter asked, her voice shaky. Malloy approached one of the spires, his scanner whirring. "They're emitting energy," he said, his eyes wide. "Almost like a heartbeat. This is a living system." Before Elena could respond, a sharp crackle filled their comms. A voice, faint and distorted, whispered through the static. It was unintelligible but chillingly deliberate, as though something was trying to speak. "Did anyone else hear that?" Carter asked, her voice trembling. "It's interference," Elena said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Stay focused." Malloy reached out to touch the spire, but before his hand made contact, the membranous surface pulsed violently, sending a wave of darkness rippling outward. The crew's lights flickered, and for a brief moment the darkness became absolute. When the lights returned, Malloy staggered back, his breathing ragged. "I saw something," he gasped. "Shapes, moving inside the spire, watching us." Elena clenched her jaw. "We're heading back to the ship, now." As they turned to leave, Carter stumbled, clutching her arm. "My suits, something's wrong." Her forearm was exposed, the fabric of her suit torn. Beneath it, her skin was changing, darkening, veins shifting unnaturally beneath the surface. She gasped, her voice rising in panic. "It's burning! I can feel it inside!" Elena grabbed her by the shoulders. "We're getting you back. Hold on." The crew hurried toward the ship, the bioluminescent lights trailing behind them like predators stalking prey. The whispering returned, louder now, a chorus of incomprehensible voices rising from the spires. By the time they reached the airlock, Carter's skin had become almost translucent, her veins glowing faintly. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes wide with terror. "It's in me," she whispered. "I can feel it changing me." The door sealed behind them, cutting off the whispers, but the dread remained. Elena turned to Malloy, her expression grim. "We're not alone here. Whatever this planet is, it's alive, and it knows we're here." The faint bioluminescent pulses grew stronger as the crew ventured deeper into the planet's sprawling crevasse. The atmosphere thickened, oppressive and humid, carrying a faint, acrid scent that clung to their helmets. Shadows seemed to cling to every surface, twisting unnaturally when illuminated. Every step forward felt heavier, the weight of the planet's gravity pressing harder against their bodies. Elena Voss led the team, her plasma torch casting a flickering glow ahead. Behind her, Malloy followed closely, his scanner clutched tightly in his hands. The device emitted an erratic, clicking sound, signaling a growing energy field. Hiro Tanaka brought up the rear, his plasma rifle raised, eyes darting into the dark. Maeve Carter was absent. Her disappearance left a void no one dared to speak of. Her glowing footprints had led them here, vanishing abruptly at the crevasse's edge. "Energy readings are off the charts," Malloy said, his voice cracking over the comms. "This isn't just geological. There's something coordinated about it." "Keep moving," Elena ordered, her voice tight. "Stay close. No one wanders off." The ground beneath their boots changed texture, becoming softer, almost spongy. It pulsed faintly, in sync with the distant lights. The walls of the crevasse glistened, coated in a slick, organic substance that seemed to ripple when touched by light. "This isn't rock," Malloy said, kneeling to examine the ground. He dug a gloved hand into the surface, pulling up a chunk of the material. It stretched like sinew before snapping back, releasing a faintly glowing liquid. "It's alive. The whole planet. It's not just one organism. It's a network." "Then where's the center?" Tanaka asked, his voice hard. Malloy pointed ahead where the glowing lights converged into a massive cavern. "There." The team pressed on, their breaths loud in their helmets. The cavern yawned before them, an enormous, pulsating void. At its heart stood a colossal structure, a sphere, perfectly smooth and blacker than the void of space. It seemed to warp the light around it, creating an aura of shimmering distortion. Tendrils of bioluminescent veins spread from its base, snaking across the cavern walls like a circulatory system. Malloy stepped forward, his scanner vibrating in his hand. This is it. The source. The core of the organism. The sphere pulsed, and for a moment the cavern was bathed in a dim, eerie glow. Shadows danced wildly, taking on shapes that resembled writhing limbs or serpentine forms. Elena felt a wave of nausea as her helmet display flickered, distorting her vision. She blinked hard, her pulse quickening. "Commander, are you seeing this?" Tanaka asked, his voice unsteady. Elena nodded. The shadows weren't random. They were deliberate, forming patterns that hinted at something intelligent, something watching. Malloy stepped closer to the sphere, ignoring Elena's sharp warning. "It's trying to communicate," he said, his voice trembling with awe. He raised a hand as if drawn by some unseen force. "This is incredible. It's not just alive, it's sentient." As his fingers brushed the sphere's surface, it reacted violently. A wave of darkness rippled outward, extinguishing their lights. The calms filled with a high-pitched whine, followed by a deafening silence. When the lights returned, Malloy was on his knees, gasping for air. His gloved hand was gone, replaced by a writhing mass of translucent tendrils that twisted and coiled, glowing faintly. "Get back!" Elena shouted, pulling him away from the sphere. "What the hell is happening to you?" Malloy stared at his mutated hand, his breathing shallow. "It's assimilating me," he said, his voice distant. "I can feel it. It's showing me everything." His eyes glazed over, and he began muttering incoherently, speaking in a mixture of his own voice and strange, guttural tones. His body convulsed, and the tendrils spread, crawling up his arm like living veins. Tanaka leveled his rifle at Malloy. "We need to end this, now." "No!" Malloy screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "You don't understand. It's not hostile. It's evolving us, connecting us. We're part of it now." The shadows surged again, this time more violently. Tendrils of darkness shot out from the walls, wrapping around Malloy and pulling him toward the sphere. He didn't resist. Instead, he let out a guttural laugh, his voice echoing unnaturally. "It's beautiful," he said, his final words before his body was consumed, merging seamlessly with the sphere's surface. The cavern trembled, and the sphere began to pulse faster. The bioluminescent veins grew brighter, their glow taking on a sickly reddish hue. Elena grabbed Tanaka's arm, pulling him back. "We're leaving. Now." As they turned to retreat, the ground shifted beneath them, undulating like the surface of a living creature. The cavern walls closed in, tendrils lashing out in every direction. One wrapped around Tanaka's leg, pulling him down. He screamed, firing his rifle blindly. The plasma rounds burned through the tendril, releasing a thick, acrid smoke, and he scrambled to his feet. "It's trying to trap us," Tanaka gasped, limping as they ran. "It doesn't want us to leave." Elena didn't respond. Her mind raced as they dodged the grasping tendrils, their lights flickering erratically. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of incomprehensible voices filling their helmets. She glanced back at the sphere, its pulses growing frantic, as if it were alive and enraged. As they neared the crevasse's exit, a massive tendril erupted from the ground, blocking their path. Elena raised her plasma torch, slashing at the tendril with a burst of searing light. It recoiled, shrieking, and she pushed Tanaka forward. "Keep moving," she yelled. The tendrils slowed their pursuit as the team emerged from the cavern, but the whispers lingered, echoing in Elena's mind. She looked back one last time, seeing the sphere's glow fading into the distance. The patterns on its surface seemed almost mournful. Reaching the safety of the ship, they collapsed inside the airlock, gasping for air. Tanaka leaned against the wall, clutching his injured leg. "What the hell was that?" he managed to say. Elena didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to her gloved hand, where a faint pulsing vein had begun to spread beneath the fabric. The core pulsed in the distance, each wave of darkness washing over the planet like a suffocating tide. Inside the Artemis IV, Elena Voss and Hiro Tanaka sat in silence, their breaths loud in the confines of their helmets. The ship groaned around them, the hull straining against the relentless pull of TrES 2B's gravitational grip. Outside, the bioluminescent veins crept closer, their glow painting the blackened landscape with an eerie, otherworldly light. Tanaka grimaced, wrapping a bandage around his injured leg. His face was pale, streaked with sweat. "It's not going to let us leave," he said, his voice flat, as if he had already resigned himself to the truth. "You saw what it did to Malloy, to Carter. It's going to finish the job." Elena leaned against the control panel, her hands trembling despite her iron will. She stared at the faint pulse in her own wrist, the slow, invasive rhythm of the organism threading its way into her veins. It had already begun, and she knew there was no stopping it. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "We're not done," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "We still have the power core. If we can overload it, we might be able to destroy the sphere. At the very least, we can cripple it." Tanaka's laugh was bitter, almost hollow. "And how do we survive the blast, Commander? Or is this one of those noble sacrifice missions?" Elena turned to face him, her jaw tight. "If we don't stop it, it won't just stay here. You saw what happened to Carter. This thing doesn't just assimilate. It spreads. If it finds a way off this planet, there's no telling what it'll do." Tanaka didn't reply. Instead, he leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was a flicker of resolve. "Fine," he said. "We go down fighting." The plan was desperate, reckless, suicidal. They would remove the power core from the Artemis IV and transport it to the cavern. Once there, they'd overload the core and detonate it manually, hoping to destroy the sphere before it could assimilate them completely. There would be no backup plan, no margin for error. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors of the ship, the bioluminescent veins outside began to press against the windows, their glow intensifying. The faint whispers returned, more insistent now, like 1,000 voices murmuring just beneath the edge of comprehension. Elena shook her head, trying to focus. They didn't have time to dwell on what the voices meant. Detaching the power core was brutal work. Sparks flew as Carter's absence left them short-handed, and Tanaka's injured leg slowed their progress. The core itself was a massive, cylindrical device, glowing faintly with internal energy, its heat radiating through their gloves. Together they wrestled it free, strapping it to a makeshift sled to drag it outside. The moment they opened the airlock, the planet seemed to react. The whispers grew into a deafening chorus, and the ground beneath their feet rippled, sending waves of disorientation through their bodies. Tendrils of shadow erupted from the earth, writhing toward them, "Move!" Elena shouted, her voice hoarse. Tanaka fired his plasma rifle, the searing light cutting through the tendrils, but they reformed almost instantly, more aggressive and erratic than before. Elena dragged the sled forward, each step a monumental effort as the shadows clawed at her boots. The power core hummed ominously, its energy unstable, as if it, too, could sense the tension in the air. They reached the cavern's entrance, its pulsating glow brighter now, like a beating heart nearing its limit. The sphere loomed at the center, its surface rippling with chaotic patterns. It was angry or afraid. "It knows," Tanaka said, his voice shaking. "It knows what we're doing." "Good," Elena snapped, setting the core down in front of the sphere. Her fingers flew over the controls, inputting the overload sequence. Sweat dripped down her face, her vision blurring as the whispers clawed at the edges of her mind. Behind her, Tanaka screamed. She turned just in time to see a massive tendril wrap around his torso, lifting him into the air. His rifle clattered to the ground as he clawed at the writhing appendage, his face contorted in agony. "Commander," he gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "Finish it." Elena's hands faltered for only a moment before she turned back to the core. The final sequence required manual activation, but it would leave no time for escape. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Tanaka's scream cut through her indecision. "Do it!" he roared. "End this thing!" With a guttural cry, Elena slammed her fist onto the activation panel. The power core began to vibrate violently, its glow intensifying to an unbearable brightness. The tendrils recoiled, writhing in agony as the sphere's pulsing patterns became erratic, almost desperate. Elena turned to Tanaka, who was still ensnared, his body twisted unnaturally. He met her gaze, a flicker of peace in his bloodied face. "Go," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She didn't argue. She ran. The ground buckled beneath her, the tendrils lashing out in every direction as the sphere emitted a deafening roar. A sound that wasn't sound at all, but something deeper, a vibration that shook her to her core. The cavern collapsed around her as she sprinted toward the exit, her legs burning, her lungs screaming for air. Behind her, the power core detonated. The explosion was blinding, a surge of white-hot energy that consumed the sphere and everything around it. The shockwave hurled Elena forward, slamming her into the ground outside. She lay there, dazed, her ears ringing, as the world seemed to dissolve into silence. When she opened her eyes, the bioluminescent veins were gone. The whispers had ceased. The sky above was still dark, but the oppressive weight of the planet's presence had lifted. She was alone. Staggering to her feet, Elena limped back to the ship. The Artemis IV was barely functional, its hull scorched and its systems faltering, but it was still intact. With trembling hands, she initiated the launch sequence. The engines sputtered, then roared to life, lifting her off the cursed surface of TrES 2b. As the planet receded into the void, Elena stared at its black silhouette, her chest heaving with a mixture of relief and grief. She had won, but the cost had been unimaginable. Tanaka, Malloy, Carter, they were all gone. Only she remained, carrying the scars of a battle that no one would ever truly understand. But as she set a course for Earth, a faint glow caught her eye. In the corner of the cockpit, just beneath the control panel, a single faintly pulsing vein traced its way across the floor. Elena's breath hitched. The whispers were gone, but something else remained.